Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. You're watching The Political Seer with me, William Lease, and wow, I am still, I'm at a loss of words. So last night was my worst ever night in, gosh, ever since Predict It came back in like 2015. My worst ever night on Predict It, and that's because I would say the most mind-boggling political result I have seen since I began doing political work in 2014. And that was this race right here, Georgia Republican Secretary of State. And however, I got a good night's sleep. I've slept on it, thought about it, and it kind of makes sense. I could explain it now. I was at a loss of words last night, but at least now I can explain it. But yeah, I lost big in this market. I lost a decent amount of money last night, probably 5% of my portfolio last night on this race alone. But let's start explaining it. So I wasn't surprised about Brian Kemp winning. I called it. I had a video saying he was going to win. I knew he was going to win outright. I said that at the beginning of last night's stream. But this result I did not expect. Now, I expected worst case scenario for Jody Hice. This was going to go to a runoff, but I thought he had a chance to win outright. And instead, he didn't even force a runoff. Raffensberger got over 50%. It doesn't make sense because unlike Brian Kemp, who kind of just ignored it all, Raffensberger directly attacked the Republican base in Georgia. He directly attacked Trump. He directly attacked those who supported Trump. He ran to CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post to trash the Republican base, to trash Republican voters in Georgia, to trash anyone who thought that there was any shenanigans whatsoever in 2020, and was adamant 100% the election was 100% clean with not a smidgen of corruption. And anyone who thought otherwise, he criticized them and antagonized them regularly for weeks. And so back last year in early 2021, I was like, this guy's toast. He is toast. He's dug his own grave. He's not even going to run. And he ran, and not only ran, he avoided a runoff. How did this happen? Well, from probably the number one thing I've learned in terms of political primaries in my work in political consulting and all that is that the things that matter most when it comes to a primary is name recognition, name recognition, name recognition, name recognition, and name recognition. Now, Jody Hice had name recognition in his own district, which is why he did well there, but outside of the rest of the state, he did not do well. You know who does have name recognition? Brad Raffensberger. So in order to defeat an incumbent in a primary, you have to have a strong grassroots campaign on the ground. You have to spend a lot of money. You probably have to be independently funded, and you really have to get your message out. And everything that I heard of is that Hice and Perdue on the governor's side did not do that. They did not really have a strong campaign. They did not have a strong ground game or anything like that to get their message out. And so if you're not doing that, the name recognition is going to rule the day. And that's what happened here. Yes, there was crossover voting by the Democrats. That absolutely happened. Now, that wasn't the reason Kemp won, but that probably was the reason why Raffensperger got over 50%. If it was a closed primary, that doesn't happen. But I think it just goes to show how powerful name recognition is. I mean, you had Marjorie Taylor Greene's district voting for Raffensperger, which makes no sense. One of the biggest critics of 2020, Marjorie Taylor Greene. She won over 70% of the vote in her primary, and the same people that gave her 70% of the vote also gave Raffensperger a plurality in that district. How do you explain that? Name recognition. Name recognition. It's a bridge too far to cross. That's what matters. And the thing is, most primary voters in both parties are not in tune. I would wager that most Republican primary voters did not know that Raffensperger went to CNN and MSNBC to trash Trump and his supporters and people who thought the election was fixed. I guarantee you, if you polled every Republican primary voter last night as they entered the voting booth or however they voted, I bet over 70% would approve of Donald Trump. I bet over 70% would say 2020 was stolen and there is fraud involved. I bet they would say that they want something to be done about it and to get to the bottom of it. So that's why I disagree with this narrative that most Georgia voters want to move on from 2020. Yeah, they might want to move on, but there's a difference from moving on and believing that 2020 was fraudulent. Those are two different things. And I believe that most Georgia Republican voters do believe 2020 was fraudulent. However, I think for a lot of these primary voters, it is too far of a bridge for them to cross to believe their own party was the one who betrayed them. I bet there is a massive chunk of Georgia Republican primary voters who believe there is fraud in 2020 believe it was 100% the Democrats doing. It's just too far of a bridge for them to cross to believe their own party, like Raffensberger especially, would have been involved. Most partisans cannot see beyond the R or D next to the politician's name. They think every Republican is the same. Every Republican has the same values and fights for them. There's no such thing as a rhino or a Republican in name only or a moderate Republican. So a lot of these Raffensberger, Marjorie Taylor Greene voters, for example, probably believe that Raffensberger is the equivalent of Marjorie Taylor Greene. They're both Republicans. They both fight for them. Most voters in general don't pay enough attention to understand what makes someone a rhino or see someone betray the base, so to speak. And I think that's really what happened in this race, is that there's just not enough people that pay that much attention to be able to cross that bridge and swallow the red pill, so to speak, to believe that people in their own party would betray them. They think everybody in their party is good. Everybody. I mean, that explains why incumbents are reelected at such a ridiculous rate, even when those incumbents sell their party out. I mean, my own Congresswoman, Kay Granger, sells us out all the time, yet she always wins like 80% of the vote. Because most people refuse to believe that a Republican, someone with R next to their name, wouldn't actually stand for Republican values. She votes for every pork-filled bill under the sun, but yet I bet most people voting for her think she takes a stand against wasteful spending in Washington. See, most people just can't make that connection. And so that really explains it. And then you have to add in the fact that Georgia has a well-oiled political machine in terms of Republican establishment politics there. I said this last night on the stream. South Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, they're all very much the same. They have strong Republican establishment networks there and machines that makes it very hard to defeat the establishment. I do not believe Raffensberger or Brian Kemp would have been renominated in a state like Ohio or Pennsylvania or even North Carolina. I've said the deeper red the state, the more one-party a state has been over the years, the more entrenched the establishment, Republican establishment, is going to be in that state, and therefore it's going to be harder to beat their incumbents. States like Ohio, Pennsylvania, since Republicans haven't had one-party rule there and Democrats have done most of the control, it's harder for the Republican establishment to get a foothold there, which is why you can see incumbents lose. It's definitely about the attitudes. Also, purple states are going to have more independent-minded voters who are probably going to do a little bit more research instead of just blindly be loyal to anyone with an R next to their name. I mean, even then, Raffensberger barely got over 50% of the vote, so nearly half of the Republican primary voter base in Georgia doesn't like him, and that's why he's probably going to lose in November to the Democrat nominee for Secretary of State, because he has a base problem. The Democrat nominee does not have a base problem. Same with Brian Kemp. He has a base problem. Stacy Abrams isn't going to have a base problem, so all those Democrat voters that helped put Brad Raffensberger over the top last night and no doubt crossed over for Kemp as well, they're not going to vote for them. That's why I think Stacy Abrams is going to win the governorship. So the same club rules and the same system that protected Raffensberger and Kemp last night and got them renominated is going to be turned around and used against them in November. There are a lot more NGOs and voter groups this time around in 2022, like Black Voter Lives Matter. They're a brand new group that wasn't around in 2020 that's going to be very active in Georgia in 2022. So that's why I have money on Stacy Abrams winning the Georgia governor's race, and I will invest more when I have more markets settle and can put more in there. I think it's been decided. I think Kemp and Raffensberger have dug their own grave, but it wasn't in the primary, but it will be in the general. So that's how I see this race playing out. So the question is, will last night be able to really translate into any future lessons we can use to bet with? Because I'm seeing the narrative, which honestly is overshadowed by the shooting in Texas yesterday. I think that the Bush clan and the McConnell clan are a bit disappointed that that's sucking all the oxygen out of the news, because the headlines this morning were supposed to be Trump and the America First movement destroyed in Georgia. And they were going to take their victory laps and proclaim that the Trump movement, the America First movement, is dead. That voters actually want to return to the old Republican Party of Chamber of Commerce, Wall Street cronyism, country club elitism, you know, Mitt Romney-style Republican, which is not true. I don't think that's true. And the markets aren't really reflecting that this morning from what I've seen. I think even the people trading on this stuff know that that's not true. Because like I said, the same people who voted for Raffensberger and Kemp last night probably still support Trump. They probably still support Trump's policies. They probably think 2020 was stolen. But like I said, it's just too far of a bridge for many of them to believe that Republicans would not have their back, that would not stand for them and would betray them. A lot of people just don't want to accept that pill. That's why I think Fox News is so dangerous if you're someone who doesn't like the old Republican guard, because Fox News exists to carry water for the Republican establishment. That's why you have so many Republicans always doing guest interviews and appearances on Fox News to get themselves name recognition, get themselves in front of the camera and spew a bunch of talking points that sound good, even though they're not going to actually take action to back up those talking points. But a lot of voters, oh, I saw him on Fox News and he said stuff that I agreed with. I'm going to vote for him. That's how a lot of people vote. Name recognition matters. But really, I don't think last night was a repudiation of Trump. I think it was just the Republican establishment political machine flexing their muscle and showing that they control things at that level. But I think overall, in the big picture nationwide, I still think most Republican voters still support the America First movement and its policies, which is why you're going to see America First candidates do a lot better in purple states like Arizona, Ohio. You're going to have Eric Greitens in Missouri, for example, probably get over the hump there. So, no, I don't think last night was a repudiation of Donald Trump. I don't think last night was proof that the Republican establishment is back in charge and that's what the Republican voters want. No, I don't. So don't bet on markets thinking that. I mean, South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, those states always do whatever the Republican establishment tells them to because the Republican establishment machine in those states is so strong. So, yeah, I mean, the markets do not reflect that at all. If that was true, if last night was a Republican base rejecting Donald Trump and America First, it would be reflected in these markets right now, and it's not. It's not. I mean, Blake Masters, an America First candidate, is probably going to be the Arizona Republican Senate nominee. Eric Greitens, who's the America First candidate in Missouri, he's probably going to be the nominee in Missouri. If they would be down heavily if that was true. So don't panic. Like I said, this is a unique situation to really the Sun Belt in general. If you want to, you can watch my stream from last night and fast forward to the point where I put together a political map and kind of group states based on how much the GOP establishment has a foothold in those states. So anyway, that is what we can learn from Georgia. Like I said, I'm going in on the Stacy Abrams to win that governor's race because I think it's been decided. I think that's been long decided. She has a lot of opposition research on Kemp, and the voter groups are going to be out in full force in Georgia in 2022. Georgia's a blue state, in my opinion. It's just going to be confirmed in November. The Republican voters in Georgia just couldn't see the forest for the trees, and Georgia's a blue state, and states like Texas better watch out because they will employ the same model in Texas. One more thing I want to talk about, Georgia Senate race. I do think Herschel Walker will be able to transcend. I think he'll get a lot of crossover appeal. I do think he will beat Raphael Warnock, but maybe Stacy Abrams will be able to drag Warnock over the finish line. But I just think there's too much. Herschel Walker, unlike Brian Kemp, doesn't have a base problem. So let's put it that way. So that's why I'm still confident in my bet here on Herschel Walker. Anyway, that wraps up for this video, the post-Georgia, post-May 24th primary recap. And I will be back more with videos like this to talk about political betting here on the Political Seer with yours truly, William Leese.